The Middle East has long been the playground of foreign powers, and it seems the region has grabbed the interest of China. China's growing influence in the region was marked when Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Riyadh back in December, where he attended the China-Arab and China-Gulf Cooperation Council summits, both the first of their kind between China and Middle Eastern states. As the U.S. presence is largely seen as declining in the region, China has stepped in to fill the gaps left by the U.S., from trade, infrastructure, to energy and defense. Saudi Arabia has long enjoyed close relations with the U.S., but in recent years, friction between the two allies has enabled China to inch closer to the kingdom. That influence was made clear when China was able to broker a normalization deal between regional arch-rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. And now, China is attempting to play mediator in another hot-button issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is currently in Beijing on a 4-day visit. He is the first Arab leader to visit China this year. As China's position in the Middle East and the greater world stage expands, we ask, what are China's goals in the region? Is the Middle East the new focal point of the U.S.-China Cold War?
So let's get to it, dear panelists. Is the Middle East the new focal point of the U.S.-China Cold War? As always, we begin with a quick fire round, 30 seconds each with your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the discussion from there. So Dr. Anat Hochberg-Moron, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
I would say that China is the influencer, is the main global power that just involved in intensifying its presence and influence in the Middle East. I wouldn't say it's the largest because the U.S. is here as deeply involved in the with the Saudi Arabia so far for the last 8 decades. But since then, the last year, there are many major shifts in the Middle East, specifically here in this very complex region in the world.
Yeah, never a dull moment here, that's for certain. Mr. Bradley Bowman, your thoughts?
You know, the United States retains vital interests in the Middle East, important partnerships there, particularly with Israel. But China's moving in. China's jumping into the region with 2 feet, certainly diplomatically, as we've seen with the Iran-Saudi broker deal, with the recent, just yesterday announced strategic agreement with the Palestinian Authority. And there are also going to increasingly be a military component to Chinese activity there. So that's the reality we confront, and it needs to be managed.
Yeah, follow the money as per always. Last but not least, Martin Himmel, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't call it a Cold War. I would call it an intense rivalry for global influence between the United States and China. And certainly the Middle East is a very big prize. For China, it's not just influence with Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Palestinians. It's also a gateway to influence with Israel, which it sees as a very valuable source for advanced technology as it continues its race with the United States in being the supreme leader in advanced technology.
Okay, lady, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards to engage in a conversation. So I do want to begin with you, Mr. Bowman. Is it the U.S. losing influence, or is it China gaining influence, or in other words, is it Washington's strategic neglect, so to speak, or China's strategic investment?
You know, I think it's America's competition to lose. And by that, I mean, I think America has a better brand. Despite all of our many faults, and Americans are very good at self-criticism, I think our model of a democratic republic, of freedom, of the rule of law, at our best, is a better model than what the authoritarian bullies in Beijing are offering. And so if we be our best and compete, I think we're going to win. But, you know, we also hear the narrative, including your lead up, that America is leaving. I can see why people might suggest that caricature following the Afghanistan withdrawal, but the reality is America is not leaving. We can do better than we've done. We're not leaving. We need to remind our partners that we're there to stay. We have common interest. And then China's there for very, very different reasons than the United States is.
So let's dive in further into the Chinese residential in this case. Dr. Horbeg Marom, until now, a very economically oriented regional footprint, so to speak. Is China looking for other things than money now? Can it pursue both being, a diplomatic miracle maker and an economic titan?
I would say that it wants to cooperate, not necessarily to compete with the United States. And let me just enlarge a little bit. What I'm saying is that on a diplomatic point of view, if we just look at it from this perspective, I would say that it's replacing the U.S. as the officer, as the negotiator, as a mediator in the Middle East. In the meanwhile, and having said that, it does not want to replace the U.S. hegemony. It wants to, I would say, intensify and expand its interest, not only the economic one, but also the diplomatic interest in the Middle East and all over the world. And as far as the U.S. is deeply involved in in the Ukraine war, this time of the opportunity, this is a window of opportunity for China to get into the Middle East as far as it can and to deepen its ties with the Saudi Arabia and all other countries here in the Middle East. But on the other hand, also to, I would say, expand its geopolitical interest as far as it can be not the denominator, not the mediator, but also the leader of the leaders here in the Middle East, name also the Saudi Arabia as well as the Iranian one.
So before we shift the focus to the Middle Eastern standpoint, still looking as a foreign actor, if you will, Martin Himmel, can a multipolar competition, okay, let's put it that way, in the Middle East, will it rather bolster or harm the region's security?
It all depends what China's and America's intentions are vis-a-vis each other. If China wants to reduce American influence, America wants to reduce China influence. So I think it's going to be a bit of a destabilizing dynamic. But on the other hand, there are opportunities. I mean, this really all happened primarily because of an American mistake, if you want to call it that, when it wanted to wrap the knuckles of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia for that very public assassination of a dissident. And but in international politics, these things have to be dealt with sometimes very differently. It's not just the moral issue. So when the Crown Prince was isolated, he looked for other leverage, and he found that it was China, and that in itself has now made the Americans run even more after China. So I think now the Americans are scrambling to get their influence back. Unfortunately, morality and ethics don't play hand in hand with interests in this region. There are other rules here sometimes. And the United States is now playing catch up with that, and China capitalized on it very effectively.
So speaking of that point exactly, Mr. Bowman, Beijing's mutual non-interference and zero conflict policy, can it really fit the Middle Eastern flair, the Middle Eastern spirit, the nature of the conflicts here?
The zero conflict policy and other such terms that we hear out of Beijing are, really kind of laughable. I wonder what the people of Taiwan think about that zero conflict policy. I wonder ask the Filipinos, ask the Vietnamese, ask the Japanese about that zero conflict policy, or we could also talk to the Uyghurs. So, one has, America is not the only place where you have to examine word versus deeds here, especially when you're dealing with an authoritarian government. So, the bottom line is China's moving in. They just inked this $10 billion worth of deals in Saudi Arabia in this conference they just had. They brokered the Saudi-Iran deal. They just signed a strategic partnership agreement with the Palestinian Authority. So they're clearly trying to be players. Their power is growing. America is still in the region. We've made some mistakes, but you saw Secretary Blinken visiting Saudi Arabia in the last week or so. You saw the National Security Advisor there. There's an understanding about American interests now. I think the administration continues to make some mistakes on the Iran nuclear agreement. So by and large, U.S. Central Command, our military headquarters, continues to conduct important military training with partners in the region. And America has made some mistakes, but is not leaving and is there to compete. And I think if we compete with our best foot forward, we're going to be just fine.
Dr. Hochberg-Marom, please, Martin, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that the United States is now going to have to pay a much bigger price than maybe it wanted to if it wants to be a player again to that extent in the region. For instance, the Saudis want much more advanced weaponry. They want the ability to start a nuclear industry in Saudi Arabia. Those are pretty heavy prices that the administration may have some reluctance to do. But if it's going to become a player, it's going to have to take that into consideration. The other thing it'll have to take into consideration is that by reaching some sort of deal with Iran that doesn't effectively keep it from going nuclear, because it's basically nuclear already, it has reached the enrichment point of making a bomb, that could be perceived also as a bit of a threat to Saudi Arabia. So I don't know how the Saudis will view this possible agreement that's coming with the United States right now. And that could be a torpedo also to greater American influence in the region.
Dr. Hochberg-Marom, you're hearing what both Mr. Himmel and Mr. Bowman are saying. Is there enough room in this Middle Eastern quagmire for both Beijing and Washington?
I would say it loudly, as ironically as it may sound, and I repeat myself, it's not only competition time, it's time for cooperation, and China knows very well that the military leader here is the U.S. The military main supplier, specifically to Saudi Arabia, is the U.S. It is not going to replace it. It's going to need this pillar in the Middle East and to add its own economy and diplomatically strength and status that it's going to intensify, to strengthen during last year and the coming month. And I would also say that when you hold the stick from its two pillars, from its two poles, ends, it's a kind of never-ending story or never-ending gameplay, because you know that if it's a zero-sum game, you would, if you do any mistake, it is going to be very harsh to your interest on one hand. But on the other hand, if you're going to inspire all what's going on and the processes that are taking care right now, specifically with the Iranian strengthening position, I would say that everybody has to cooperate all together and put the interests a little bit, the values, aside, and think how we can collaborate in order to halt and to stop the deterioration situation over here.
Yeah, Bradley Bowman, your concluding remarks before we take a break and shift the focus to the Middle Eastern side of the divide.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line, there's so much there. I did a 35-page report with some colleagues about a month ago on U.S.-Saudi relations and what's going on there, and I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail. The reasons the Saudis inked that Beijing brokered deal is they don't want missile and drone strikes on their cities, so the Crown Prince can pursue his Saudi Arabia 2030 thing. We talked about arms. So there's more detail there, but bottom line is we got to avoid this false binary that I just heard between the military and the commercial, because they absolutely overlap.
Okay, that's the side of the groom. Then now the side of the bride. We're taking a short break, but when we get back, we dive into the Middle Eastern outlook on the U.S.-China rivalry here in the region. Do not go anywhere. A few minutes, and we're back with the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still here with us, Mr. Martin Himmel, Mr. Bradley Bowman, and Dr. Anat Hochberg-Marom. Thank you all very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, the voice of peace from Beijing, maybe. Let's take a listen to China's strongman Xi and Palestinian President Abbas speaking during the latter's visit there in the Chinese capital. Let's take a listen.
Against the backdrop of rapid global changes unseen in a century and new changes in the situation of the Middle East, China is willing to strengthen coordination and cooperation with Palestine to promote an early, comprehensive, fair and lasting solution to the Palestine issue. Today, we will jointly announce the establishment of a China-Palestine strategic partnership, which will be an important milestone in the history of bilateral relations. China is willing to take this opportunity to comprehensively promote friendly cooperation with Palestine in various fields.
Here, I would also like to express my heartfelt thanks to you for defending the rights of the Palestinian people and supporting the just cause of Palestine. Palestine trusts China and believes that China will continue to uphold justice. We will also firmly support China.
So let's get to it. Can China bring peace to the Middle East? Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Mr. Bowman, please take the lead.
You know, this is another example of Beijing trying to jump into the Middle East with both feet, particularly when it comes to diplomacy. I think it's important for Israelis to remember that China has consistently sided with the Palestinians at the United Nations. We've seen such proposals before from China. This is not new, but it's definitely a signal of political intent that should be taken seriously. And we know the Palestinians are eager for investment and diplomatic backing in international fora.
Martin Himmel, your thoughts?
I think that these efforts to flirt with the Palestinians is really an effort to extend and entrench the influence that China wants to have in the greater region. It's the greater region that really influences China. And Israel. Let's not forget that Israel and China have a huge trade together, and China's very interested in what's going on with Israeli high tech.
Dr. Hochberg-Marom, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do totally agree with you. And I do want to add that it's time for a wake-up call. I would say it very sharply to Israel, because not only that they have to strengthen the ties with China, but also to enlarge it and to dip it as far as possible, and not sit and wait what will be in the next few weeks or month in the Middle East. It's a time. Yeah. It's a very urgent time to recalculate or reconsider the interest with the Palestinian issue.
Yeah, so let's continue from this point exactly, and let's feel free to interact. Dr. Hochberg-Marom, is Israel keeping all of its eggs in one basket?
I wouldn't say in one basket, but I think we have to recalculate what's going on here. And as far as China is going to be involved and engage in each and every agreement that is taken, that is signed over here, not only the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, not only between Iran and its the Gulf countries, but also with regard to the Palestinian. I would say that it's a time to have reconsider regarding the threats and opportunities in the Middle East. Not only from the perspective from a military perspective, but also very geopolitical point of view, and to see what the pros and cons and to enlarge it. Yep.
If I may say something?
Of course. Yeah.
Yes, I think that don't be surprised that if this estrangement, with quotation marks, between the Biden administration and Prime Minister Netanyahu continues, that we'll be hearing about a prime minister visit to Beijing at some stage. I just think that could be a form of leverage. Doesn't mean that Israel's going to break all its agreements with the United States on protecting in all sorts of technical property, but I think that he might use it himself, Netanyahu, as a way of saying that he does have relevance, he does have stature, and it might be a Chinese interest as well to invite him.
Mr. Bowman.
You know, every nation state that is sovereign will make its own decisions. That's true of Saudi Arabia. That's true of Israel. And as I've said repeatedly, the United States is in a competition with China, and I say game on. I think we can compete and win. But I would say also that before anyone listening follows the advice of the last two speakers with respect to Israel and China, I would think twice on that. I would definitely think twice on that. Americans of both parties increasingly view every bilateral relationship through the lens of the Chinese Communist Party. The quickest way to deal an existential blow to the U.S.-Israel relationship is for Israel to play footsies with the Chinese Communist Party. So if you are an enemy of U.S., you can think I'm playing hyperbole here, but as someone who worked in the U.S. Senate for 9 years, the quickest way to deal a death blow to the U.S.-Israel strategic partnership is to follow the advice of the last two speakers.
Wow. One of the last two speakers would like to respond?
Well, I wouldn't put it as apocalyptic as that. I would say that you can sort of play footsie without making true and extensive love and still survive it. I think you got to take into consideration the fact that, the relationship between Biden and Netanyahu is pretty bad right now. And I think Netanyahu is in a position where he feels very closed off from the world. And he might, through his own political acrobatics, try to engineer a meeting with the Chinese president in such a way saying maybe would ease tensions and not exacerbate tensions. And he needs to show himself in the international stage. And I think he could possibly do that without totally ruining relationships with the United States.
But here's the point. Yeah. Israel and the United States have deeper interests in that have to transcend the political, short-sighted moment. And so I understand politicians look at polls and these sorts of things, and they're concerned about what's happening in today's news. But there are deeper interests and values here at stake that serve both American and Israeli interests. And a strategic move toward China would be the worst possible mistake that Jerusalem can make at this moment.
Dr. Natorberg Marom, no one can blame me for being an everlasting optimist, but perhaps on the flip side of this potential confrontation between Washington and Jerusalem, if we're talking about shared interests, perhaps the American response, so to speak, to China's peacemaking efforts be a push forward with the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, it could be, but even prior to this option of opportunity, I would say, let's take another path. Let's look at not only from the Chinese-Israeli relationships, but also definitely regarding the Israeli-Palestinian relationships. Maybe this is a time, an opportunity to get closer and just renew the process, I would say, peace process, because it's a time, very tense time in Israel, not only the political one, but also the security. And I would say that it's because of the transition period that we are all currently living in. I would say it's a time to a wake-up call, not only to have recalculation regarding the broad or the global interest, but also regarding the Middle East interest here, from Israeli point of view, to renew the relation with the Palestinians, also with the Abraham Accords, to enlarge and to deepen the ties with the other Arab countries. It's not mutually exclusive. It's all together. To put it as kind of
a one-sided thing is, we are concluding our discussion in a split second. Martin Bradley, will the expansion of the Abraham Accords be a blow to China's policy here, or not necessarily so, Mr. Bowman?
I think an expansion of the Abraham Accords would be a win for Israel. It would be a win for America's Arab partners, and it would be a win for a region, and it would be a serious blow, first and foremost, to the Islamic Republic of Iran. They want their adversaries divided, and we should want them unified and strong.
And maybe the cherry on top, a blow to China, but just a cherry on top. Okay, Mr. Bradley Bowman, Dr. Natorberg Marom, Mr. Martin Himmel, thank you so very much for joining us. It's been fascinating listening to you, as always. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.